When the clock strikes spring, you stop. Whatever you're doing, take a long, deep breath, then another. Take off your shoes and socks or stockings. Take yourself out into the open air as it begins its softening, onto the outleafing earth as it begins its blossoming, under the lengthening sun as it begins its farewell to winter warming. Let all your senses feel the first notes, the fresh with promise notes of another greening time. Enter through your eyes and ears, nose, and skin, your stirring heart, unwinding mind, when the clock strikes spring. Welcome. And thank you for leaning in to this latest Floating Poetry broadcast, the 48th in my ongoing weekly series. Coming to you live by the life-giving sea from Watch Hill, Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Inviting you this week to breathe spring into your senses, into your body and spirit. Take in all of its beauty and renewing energy, your direct, remembered, or if you're elsewhere in the world, imagined experience of it, and to spring forth like new green growth from the heart and root of your being, from the vibrant and vivid center and wonder of your inner self, inner nature. Whatever season of life you're in, whatever becoming or new or next coming of age you're in, or desiring, or newly shaping. So, for this call to spring, to emerge, this literal and metaphorical inquiry of ours, I've shaped a fresh landscape of thoughts, questions, cultural commentary, and poetry. But before we dip into the well of them, I'd like to tell you I hear from regular listeners and sometimes ask others, and would be curious what your answer is to how you actually listen to these broadcasts. Aside from those who take notes of resonating thoughts, as they do, and even make time marks to return to later and more slowly on replays. Some regulars say they listen while walking or driving, some while cooking, others dining, two in particular, listening right now, during their date nighting. But a good many of you like to ease back in a soft chair or couch or stretch out in bed with no or low lights or lit candles and quietly drink in the whole program. How lovely to hear. My great favorite to date is a listener down Harriman Parkway in New York State who told me just the other day that she listened as she floated in the bath. Well, how fitting. How fitting is this for a floating poetry broadcast? Now I'm given to wondering if sometime I should try coming to you live at some other time in literally floating form, maybe from a sailboat under sail, or from high up in a hot air balloon, or deep undersea in a BB-esque bathysphere. I'll keep you posted on that. All right then, on we go. Into spring. Let's start with a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. A lovely poem from time long past. He was a mid to late 1800s poet. I'm reading this especially for my very dear friend of forever, Judith Carrington. Known her my entire adult life, and she's been a great champion all along. Spring. Nothing is so beautiful as spring. When weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush, thrush's eggs look like little low heavens, and thrush through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring the ear. It strikes like lightnings to hear him sing. The glassy pear tree leaves and blooms, they brush the descending blue. The blue is all in a rush with richness. The racing lambs, too, have fair their fling. What is all this juice and all this joy? A strain of the earth's sweet being in the beginning, in Eden garden. Have, get, before it cloy, before it cloud, Christ, Lord, and sour with sinning, innocent mind and Mayday and girl and boy, most, O maid's child, thy choice, and worthy the winning. Thank you, Gerard Manley Hopkins. Kenneth Rexroth, another great favorite of mine, poet, toward an organic philosophy. Spring, Coast Range, first part of that group of poems. The glow of my campfire is dark red and flameless. The circle of white ash widens around it. I get up and walk off in the moonlight, and each time I look back, the red is deeper and the light smaller. Scorpio rises late with Mars caught in his claw. The moon has come before them, the light, like a choir of children in the young laurel trees. It is April. The shad, the hot-headed fish, climbs the rivers. There is trillium in the damp canyons. The fetid adder's tongue lolls by the waterfall. There was a farm at this campsite once. It is almost gone now. There were sheep here after the farm, and fire. Long ago burned the redwoods out of the gulch. The Douglas fir off the ridge. Today the soil is stony and incoherent. The small stones lie flat and plate the surface like scales. 20 years ago, the spreading gully toppled the big oak over and onto the house. Now there's nothing left but the foundations hidden in poison oak, and above on the ridge, 6 lonely, ominous fence posts. The redwood beams of the barn make a footbridge over the deep, waterless creek bed. The hills are covered with wild oats, dry and white by midsummer. I walk in the random survivals of the orchard. In a patch of moonlight, a mole shakes his tunnel like an angry vein. Orion walks waist-deep in the fog coming in from the ocean. Leo crouches under the zenith. There are tiny hard fruits already on the plum trees. The purity of the apple blossoms is incredible. As the wind dies down, their fragrance clusters around them like thick smoke. All the day they roared with bees. In the moonlight they are silent and immaculate. Thank you, Kenneth Rexroth. Well, here's one plein air poem of mine on the pure, sheer delights of spring. It's called Spring Unpieced. So for you climbers and skiers, when we're on-piste versus off-piste. Spring Unpieced. I ski with my soul's body, soul, through the first snow of cherry blossoms, the fresh cloud powder, the sun flurries that speckle the shade, down the soft, inviting, greening slopes and budding trails of another spring. Here's another from a May in Central Park. Savoring the spring. Savoring the spring. Savoring the old and new blooms of heart, of mind, the greening up, the leafing out of this life, this living. Well, I wasn't going to let this day go by, this St. Patrick's Day go by, without a poem as a toast to that and a few other things for the moment around that, because I do have some Irish in me, a good bit of it actually. So here's a poem from St. Patrick's Day back in 1998 in New York City, as I roved around. A Tura Lura Day. There's a glossy, moss-hatted leprechaun smiling Irishly on the subway platform, waiting to travel underground, as all leprechauns do, up to Fifth Avenue, where the street is paved with red-headed men and freckle-faced maids, and a St. Patty's parade is in full swing. The city a wild shamrock, lilting with Danny boys and sweet Kathleens, and people dressed in every shade of spring. So, yeah, St. Patrick's Day, and I'd like to raise a toast to Ireland and its Celtic soul, and to my ancestors, the Keenans from Cork, whose poetic spirit surely, I feel, infused parts of me in soul and face and word. I happen to have a good bottle of Irish whiskey at my elbow for the occasion to wet the lips with, a single pot still, single malt called Writer's Tears. How about that? A gift from a good patron. So let me pour just a bit while you're here, and we can toast together. You might have something that you're toasting with right now, Irish or not, but here's a toast to all the gifts, dear listeners, all the gifts of Ireland and the Irish. Slàinte. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, what do you think about a little song? I learned this Irish song, as a boy in Catholic school, St. Rose of Lima, New Jersey, way back when. And I remember the whole school one day, we had to learn this song to sing it to our pastor, who happened to be a bishop. His name was Bishop John J. Doherty. Amazing, larger-than-life, incredible smile and laugh, and great Irish face, big gold ring, beautiful fellow. And I remember the whole school, I don't know how many there were, maybe a couple of hundred of us at that particular day in the auditorium. And we sang him Galway Bay, and he cried. Remember that. I think I was standing mid to back, but I remember I can see the tears in his eyes. Let's give it a go. If you ever go across the sea to Ireland, then maybe at the closing of your day, you can sit and watch the moon rise over Claddagh, or watch the sun go down on Galway Bay, just to hear again the ripple of the trout stream, the women in the meadows making hay, or to sit beside a turf fire in a cabin and watch the barefoot gossoons as they play, and the breezes that blow o'er the sea from Ireland are perfumed by the heather as they blow, and the women in the uplands digging praties speak a language that the strangers do not know. One more to celebrate with is Evan Boland's poem, Mother Ireland. At first I was land. I lay on my back to be fields, and when I turned on my side, I was a hill under freezing stars. I did not see, I was seen. Night and day words fell on me, seeds, raindrops, chips of frost. From one of them I learned my name. I rose up. I remembered it. Now I could tell my story. It was different from the story told about me. And now also it was spring. I could see the wound I had left in the land by leaving it. I traveled west. Once there I looked with so much love at every field as it unfolded its rusted wheel on its pram chassis, and at the gorse bright distances I had been that they misunderstood me. Come back to us, they said. Trust me, I whispered. Well, as winter clears away, we all know about, and many get about, spring cleaning around this time of year. And here's another angle off that idea. Spring cleaning. A spring of life cleaning. A natural time to air and clean out. And a natural time to air and clear out everything unneeded. Everything, everyone outworn, unserving, undeserving of being held on to jettison the deadening thought and leaden weight of all the truly unnecessary, the clearly non-essential, to make ample, fruitful room for the most meaningful, for the must-haves. Create deep breathing room for all the must-bees. Elizabeth Gilbert told this little story that's so lovely, and I think about the innocent flowering of children and us as children when we were. She said, I had a great story recently. I love telling it, of a little girl who was in a drawing lesson. She was 6, and she was in the back drawing. The teacher said this little girl hardly ever paid attention. In this drawing lesson, she did, and the teacher was fascinated. She went over to her and she said, what are you drawing? And the girl said, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said that nobody knows what God looks like, and the girl said, they will in a minute. Isn't that marvelous? They will in a minute. Kids will take a chance. If they don't know, they'll have a go. They're not frightened of being wrong. If you're not prepared to be wrong, you will never come up with anything original. And by the time they get to be adults, most kids have lost the capacity. They have become frightened of being wrong. Well, listeners, let's do everything to counter that sort of notion among them, huh? Those of us who have children or influence over them of a good kind. I thought as I sought out nourishing material for this program about the richness and resin of our childhoods in ways like that. And Liesel Müller wrote this poem, Drawings by Children, apropos. The sun may be visible or not. It may be behind you, the viewer of these pictures. But the sky is always blue, if it is day. If not, the stars come almost within your grasp. Crooked, they reach out to you on the verge of falling. It is never sunrise or sunset. There is no bloody eye spying on you across the horizon. It is clearly day or night. It is bright or totally dark. It is here and never there. In the beginning, you only needed your head, a moon swimming in space, and 4 bare branches. And when your body was added, it was light and thin at first, not yet the dark chapel from which later you tried to escape. You lived in a non-Newtonian world. Your arms grew up from your shoulders. Your feet did not touch the ground. Your hair was streaming. You were still flying. The house is smaller than you remembered. It has windows but no door. A chimney sits on the gable roof. A curl of smoke reassures you, but the house has only 2 dimensions, like a mask without its face. The people who live there stand outside as though time were always summer. There's nothing behind the wall except a space where the wind whistles, but you cannot see that. So we can come of age again and again. I feel that's a very important. That resonated, and I was listening to a program of David White's the other day, one of his recents, and he spoke of all the different comings of age we can have. There's not just one. I think we were brought up to think, you just come of age and that's it. But we can have many, 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 many through our life of renewals, like springs, right? In that way. And each birthday, I have a next one actually in April, on the 5th of April. I'm ever moved to create some poem or let out some poem that reflects or resonates my life or self or something essential to me. And in the spring of 2017, on my birthday day of that year, this poem, Bare, B-A-R-E, bare feet, hands, heart, loins. The way I came into the world then, am living and loving into the world now. An ever-fresh body of being, feeling. All essence and innocence, nascence and renaissance. Bear. There is a poet, some of you may know, Robert Penn Warren, and on the creating of ourselves, on the becoming of ourselves, and poetry. He had this to say: the self is never to be found, but must be created. Not the happy accident of passivity, but the product of 1,000 actions, large and small, conscious or unconscious, performed not, quote, away from it all, but in the face of, quote, it all, for better or worse, in work and leisure rather than in free time. The self is a style of being, continually expanding in a vital process of definition, affirmation, revision, and growth. A process that is the image, we may say, of the life process of a healthy society itself. How does poetry come into all this? By being an antidote, a sovereign antidote for passivity. For the basic fact about poetry is that it demands participation. From the secret physical echo in muscle and nerve that identifies us with the medium, to the imaginative enactment that stirs the deepest recesses where life will and values reside. Beyond that, it nourishes our life will in the process of testing our values. And this is not to be taken as implying a utilitarian aesthetic. It is rather one way of describing our pleasure in poetry as an adventure in the celebration of life. Well, thank you, Robert Penn Warren. I'm completely on board with that, and it is a great adventure, and I'm glad to be one of the adventurers and creators of some of the adventures. Well, this idea of knowing the self, and I feel only by going and knowing deep within, in so many ways, whether it's loving ourselves or knowing ourselves or what have you, can we meet what we need to move us mightily or beautifully in the outer world. It applies. Here's a poem, but I'd say it. I wrote it for this particular artist friend of mine in Holland, in the Netherlands, Jasper Krabbe. But I feel it applies to all of us in a way, seeking self and life understanding. It's called Exploring the Interior. It's not before that. Let me have a sip of winter water. Okay. Exploring the interior. Your face points the way into an unmapped interior, starting on the coast, an ever-changing charter of rugged shoreline, headland, jawline, all restlessly tidal, then moves inward through eyesight alone, through light and dark terrain, into deepest interior, where only the most intrepid explorer can travel, can begin to limn the wildness, the dangers, wonders, hiddenness, can map the longitudes of the heart, memory, the latitudes of longing, or measure the distances between the soul of this place and the sun, moon, the guiding stars. So, call to explore our interiors even more so, even more fully and widely, deeply. Octavia Butler, from her book, Parable of the Talents, interesting book, on becoming. A century after Walt Whitman wrote that, quote, "There is in sanest hours a consciousness, a thought that rises independent, lifted out from all else, calm like the stars, shining eternal." She wrote, "Self is. Self is body and bodily perception. Self is thought, memory, belief. Self creates, self destroys. Self learns, discovers, becomes. Self shapes, self adapts, self invents its own reasons for being. To shape God, shape self. All prayers are to self, and in one way or another, all prayers are answered. Pray, but beware, your desires, whether or not you achieve them, will determine who you become." The founder and curator of Brainpicking, so I mention her site often. Great resource, very illuminating and inspiring. And dot connecting, Maria Popova, on becoming and desire, she said this, that the word desire itself derives from the Latin for, quote, "without a star." Radiating a longing for direction, it is by wanting that we orient ourselves in the world, by finding and following our private North Star, that we walk the path of becoming. Well, I didn't read that before I wrote this poem a while back, but I do believe in our North Stars. I wrote this back in 2016. Here it is now. when I read that, I thought of this poem, The North Star, for you and me and all of us. It doesn't shine far off, is closer than you think. It shines clearly, prominently, not outside, but deep inside you, night and day, in the great constellation of your being, your vos major, a constant presence, Polaris, in your crown, fixed and bright enough to navigate by, circumnavigate with, to follow, if or when you're ready and willing, on a luminous, longed-for way of life, heart, self, terrestrial and celestial, your ever-faithful, providential North Star. Well, that led me to think about a World War I poet I'm particularly fond of. Well, at least one of his poems it speaks to me often, and sometimes I'm very emotional about it. I can't even read it. But I think I'll be able to do that tonight. I am emotional, but well, I'm going to read it anyway. Richard Aldenington is his name. It's called The Poplar. Why do you always stand there, shivering, between the white stream and the road? The people pass through the dust, on bicycles, in carts, in motor cars. The wagoners go by at dawn. The lovers walk on the grass path at night. Stir from your roots. Walk, poplar. You are more beautiful than they are. I know that the white wind loves you, is always kissing you and turning up the white lining of your green petticoat. The sky darts through you like blue rain, and the gray rain drips on your flanks and loves you. And I have seen the moon slip his silver penny into your pocket as you straightened your hair, and the white mist curling and hesitating like a bashful lover about your knees. I know you, poplar. I have watched you since I was 10. But if you had a little real love, a little strength, you would leave your nonchalant, idle lovers and go walking down the white road behind the wagoners. There are beautiful beaches down beyond the hill. Will you always stand there shivering? Well, maybe subconsciously inspired by Aldenington's Poplar poem, I composed this some Aprils back in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn. This call to emerging, like his, in its way. Rise from your roots is the title. From the deep earth of yourself into the wealth of everything the world is offering, is asking you to branch out to, ascend to, with all feeling, all rejoicing. Rise from your roots. There was a Canadian psychiatrist and adventurer, Maurice Buck. He lived from 1837 to 1902. And his book, Cosmic Consciousness, a study in the evolution of the human mind. It's a life story, really, that I think it's about a great springing forth. And by his own account, he was, quote, born of good middle-class English stock, grew up almost entirely without education, working tirelessly on his parents' farm in the backwoods of Canada, tending cattle, horses, sheep, and pigs, working in the hayfield, driving oxen and horses, and running various errands from the earliest age, learned to read when he was still a small child, and soon began devouring novels and poetry. He remembers that, like Emily Dickinson, he never, even as a child, quote, accepted the doctrines of the Christian church, which was countercultural at that time because it was very religious where he was and how it was. And his mother died when he was very young, and his father soon thereafter, and he remembers being overcome by, quote, a sort of ecstasy of curiosity and hope. An ecstasy of curiosity and hope. So at 16, he left the farm to, quote, live or die as might happen, trekked from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from Ohio to San Francisco, worked on farms and railroads and steamboats, narrowly escaping death by illness, starvation, battling. In his 20th year, he heard of the first major discovery of silver ore in America, joined a mining party of which he was the only survivor, and barely, and on his way to California, while crossing the mountains of the Sierra Nevada, suffered frostbite so severe that one foot and some toes on his foot had to be amputated. Well, he finally gets to the Pacific coast, used a little money he had, gave himself an education, proper college education, devoured ideas from books, poems, taught himself French, read Goethe, and at 30 he discovered Walt Whitman, and that sent him over the moon. And he had an awakening, ultimately, like a transformational moment. Like he was wrapped by a flame-colored cloud, thought of fire, and it led him to an experience, brief but lifelong after that, of being transformed. And he realized then that the cosmos is not dead matter, but a living presence, and that the soul of man is immortal, and that the universe is so built in order that without any peradventure all things work together for the good of each and all, and the foundation principle of the world is what we call love, and that the happiness of everyone is in the long run absolutely certain. He called it cosmic consciousness. And isn't that a wonderful story? You think about a man's wild beginnings and happenings and leading him to something so significant. And then, of course, he wrote this fascinating book and went on and had quite some life. What life metaphors, I'm asking you, can you see, can you point to in your experiences that show you where you are or were, or where you need to go next, or have gone, and what they've taught you? You know, I've had many of those kinds of moments. In the last broadcast spoke about synchronicities and callings, and I was on the Northern Ontario Shield in Canada back in August of 2012 on the cracked trail to Killarney Ridge, and this poem, as I climbed that ridge, is called Ascending. Eyes, hands, and feet feel the way for my whole body to climb the steep jigsaw of boulders tumbled out of time. See their play of light and line, color and mass. Touch and hold their smoothness, roughness, coolness, heat. Find on them, in them, each new footing to stretch to or spring from as I ascend. So as I thought of the way we ascend in our lives, in many directions, by the way, not just up, or certainly definitely not just linear, I feel life is so multi-dimensional, multi-directional, that I came across in my researchings for us a piece by a mountaineer, René Daumal, and on mountains and the meaning of life, an alpine allegory of courage and the measure of wisdom is his book, Mount Analog, it's called. Very interesting. And he said this about the metaphor: Alpinism is the art of climbing mountains by confronting the greatest dangers with the greatest prudence. Art is used here to mean the accomplishment of knowledge and action. You cannot always stay on the summits. You have to come down again. So what's the point? Only this: what is above knows what is below. What is below does not know what is above. While climbing, take note of all the difficulties along your path. During the descent, you will no longer see them, but you will know that they are there if you have observed carefully. Our friend, my fellow poet and the philosopher, David Whyte, on being almost there. When you think of our progressions and journeys and travels toward things and through things. This is from his book, Consolations. This section is called, or segment is called Close, C-L-O-S-E, is what we almost always are. close to happiness, close to another, close to leaving, close to tears, close to God, close to losing faith, close to being done, close to saying something, or close to success, and even, with the greatest sense of satisfaction, close to giving the whole thing up. Our human essence lies not in arrival, but in being almost there. We are creatures who are on the way, our journey a series of impending, anticipated arrivals. We live by unconsciously measuring the inverse distances of our proximity, an intimacy calibrated by the vulnerability we feel in giving up our sense of separation. To go beyond our normal identities and become closer than close is to lose our sense of self in temporary joy, a form of arrival that only opens us to deeper forms of intimacy that blur our fixed, controlling surface identity. To consciously become close is a courageous form of unilateral disarmament, a chancing of our arm and our love, a willingness to hazard our affections in an unconscious declaration that we might be equal to the inevitable loss that the vulnerability of being close will bring. Human beings do not find their essence through fulfillment or eventual arrival, but by staying close to the way they like to travel, to the way they hold the conversation between the ground on which they stand and the horizon to which they go. What makes the rainbow beautiful is not the pot of gold at its end, but the arc of its journey between here and there, between now and then, between where we are now and where we want to go, illustrated above our unconscious heads in primary color. We are, in effect, always close to the ultimate secret, that we are more real in our simple wish to find a way than any destination we could reach. The step between not understanding that and understanding that is as close as we get to happiness. Well, I was thinking of people that I know. I imagine you know too, of all different ages, but especially people who are significantly chronologically older, and what they're modeling for us. I'm fortunate to have many who model incredible vitality and continued growth and wisdom and light and lightness. Here's Grace Paley on The Art of Growing Older, who said, "The main thing is this. When you get up in the morning, you must take your heart in your two hands. You must do this every morning." I wanted to read you a little bit from the writer Henry Miller on staying youthful and spirited. So I'll just read you a little. There's more, but I think in the interest of our time, I'll read you the beginning of this. "If at 80 you're not a cripple or an invalid, if you have your health, if you still enjoy a good walk, a good meal with all the trimmings, if you can sleep without first taking a pill, if birds and flowers, mountains and sea still inspire you, you're a most fortunate individual, and you should get down on your knees morning and night and thank the good Lord for his saving and keeping power. If you're young in years but already weary in spirit, already on the way to becoming an automaton, it may do you good to say to your boss under your breath, of course, 'F you, Jack, you don't own me.' If you can fall in love again and again, if you can forgive your parents for the crime of bringing you into the world, if you're content to get nowhere, just take each day as it comes. If you can forgive as well as forget, if you can keep from growing sour, surly, bitter, and cynical, man, you've got it half licked." How about that? Wonderful, wonderful. I'll read you just the end part of it. "Perhaps the most comforting thing about growing old gracefully is the increasing ability not to take things too seriously. One of the big differences between a genuine sage and a preacher is gaiety. When the sage laughs, it is a belly laugh. When the preacher laughs, which is all too seldom, it is on the wrong side of the face." So sometimes all of us, whether we're creatives, so to speak, or artists, or whoever we are in the world, we often come up against the famous resistance of some kind. And my man Seth Godin has talked a lot about that, as also Stephen Pressfield, the writer, has talked a lot about that, and very wisely, and I think worth dipping into if you haven't heard them about this, but I'll give you a little bit of Seth Godin talking about that. This is what we do for a living, meaning as a creator. We dance with the resistance. We don't make it go away. You cannot make it go away. You cannot make the voice go away. You cannot make the fear go away because it's built in. What you can do when it shows up, you say, "Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Let's dance about this." What we need to do is say, what's the smallest, tiniest thing that I can master, and what's the scariest thing I can do in front of the smallest number of people that can teach me how to dance with the fear? Once we get good at that, we just realize that it's not fatal, and it's not intellectually realized that. We've lived something that wasn't fatal, and that idea is what's so key, because then you can do it a little bit more and more. But what the industrial economy seduced us into believing is that the deal was simple. You work your day doing something you're not proud of, and you decompress at night with television and whiskey, and on weekends you can go for a run, right? Do that forever, and 40 years from now, you're dead. That's the deal. And we sold that deal to a lot of people. It's back to the idea of what we're truly afraid of. I'm more afraid of settling. I'm more afraid of not giving what I can give than I am afraid of doing it. And so when we're sitting quietly, there's a debate we have to have with ourselves all the time, which is, what is my work? And if my work is to have more impact, I don't think we start by asking. I think we start by giving. Once you get hooked on that culturally, then doors open. Doors open because your work precedes you. You are your work, not your resume, but the ruckus you have made before, the people you have touched before. Can you name someone who has built a life around that who's a failure? I can't. Okay. Pause for a sip. No more whiskey, though. That one earlier was enough. A soupçon. Okay. Let's sort of stretch now. So let's come back to springing forth in our beings. Well, that takes inspiration, and that takes courage. And Audre Lorde, our writer, speaks to that. There are no new ideas still waiting in the wings to save us. There are only old and forgotten ones, new combinations, extrapolations, and recognitions from within ourselves, along with the renewed courage to try them out. And we must constantly encourage ourselves and each other to attempt the heretical actions that our dreams imply and so many of our old ideas disparage. In the forefront of our move toward change, there's only poetry to hint at possibility made real. Our poems formulate the implications of ourselves. There are no new ideas. There are only new ways of making them felt, of examining what those ideas feel like being lived on Sunday morning at 7 a.m., after brunch, during wild love, making war, giving birth, mourning our dead. While we suffer the old longings, battle the old warnings and fears of being silent and impotent and alone, while we taste new possibilities and strengths of that. The poet Muriel Rukeyser on A Fuller Life for us. It is at this moment that we turn, in the imaginations which tap that energy, and the energy itself and its release, we see our power. Man, the mystery man, the pure force, man, the taproot of naked vision, the source himself will look in such a moment for deeper sources, for the sources of power that can bring a fuller life to a desperate time. We cut away the old life, cutting down to the root. And the root of such power, of such invention, is in the imaginative lives of certain men and women, responding in their way and with their proper kinds of love to the wishes of history, that is, to the wishes of the people at that moment, however disguised, however premature and dark. Let's breathe a little more spring in here. Mary Shelley, just literal spring, who said, "Winter passed away, and spring, led by the months, awakened life in all nature. The forest was dressed in green, the young calves frisked on the new-sprung grass, the wind-winged shadows of light clouds sped over the green cornfields. The hermit cuckoo repeated his monotonous all hail to the season. The nightingale, bird of love and minion of the evening star, filled the woods with song, while Venus lingered in the warm sunset, and the young green of the trees lay in gentle relief along the clear horizon." 20 Aprils ago in Central Park, this was a poem of mine called Our Spring-Fed Lake. A squirrel furrows in a field of purple windmills before the gentle arc of iron bridge carries me past a white and yellow wedge of breeze-blown jonquils, out under waking trees, and round this spring-fed lake we call the reservoir. And sort of melding these ideas, right, of spring and the metaphors and the season arriving can spring into us, can inspire us now and always to spring out. This is called The Day to Spring, and it was written on the spring equinox in 2016. It's the day to spring, from winter's bare coil, the day for self and nature to draw its long-bowed heart and sap back and let fly, freely, swiftly, vernally forth, air to ground, arrowing with anticipation into the marrow of all newness, all awakening, all fullness. In Patti Smith's book, M-Train, she said, "Nothing can be truly replicated, not a love, not a jewel, not a single line. I've lived in my own book, one I never planned to write, recording time backwards and forwards. I've watched the snow fall onto the sea and traced the steps of a traveler long gone. I've relived moments that were perfect in their certainty. We want things we cannot have. We seek to reclaim a certain moment, sound, sensation. I want to hear my mother's voice. I want to see my children as children. Hands small, feet swift. Everything changes. Boy grown, father dead, daughter taller than me, weeping from a bad dream. Please stay forever, I say to the things I know. Don't go, don't go, don't grow." But shard by shard we're released from the tyranny of so-called time. A curtain of purple wisteria partially conceals the entrance to a familiar garden. In a wink, a lifetime, we pass through the infinite moments of a silent overture. I believe in movement. I believe in that light-hearted balloon, the world. I believe in midnight and the hour of noon. But what else do I believe in? Sometimes everything, sometimes nothing. It fluctuates like light flitting over a pond. I believe in life, which one day each of us shall lose. When we are young, we think we won't, that we are different. Home is a desk now, the amalgamation of a dream. Home is the cats, my books, and my work, never done. All the lost things that may one day call to me, the faces of my children who will one day call to me. Maybe we can't draw flesh from reverie nor retrieve a dusty spur, but we can gather the dream itself and bring it back uniquely whole. The poet Wendell Berry, I've mentioned him before. To remind himself, he wrote this poem, how to be a poet. Make a place to sit down. Sit down. Be quiet. You must depend upon affection, reading, knowledge, skill. More of each than you have. Inspiration, work, growing older, patience. For patience joins time to eternity. Any readers who like your poems, doubt their judgment. Breathe with unconditional breath, the unconditioned air. Shun electric wire. Communicate slowly. Live a three-dimensioned life. Stay away from screens. Stay away from anything that obscures the place it is in. There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. Accept what comes from silence. Make the best of it. Make the best you can of it. Of the little words that come out of the silence, like prayers, prayed back to the one who prays, make a poem that does not disturb the silence from which it came. All right, we're coming into our last handful of things for us tonight. I'll share with you next time Stanley Kunitz, he was made the Poet Laureate of the United States at 90. It was either 90 or 95, 90 years old. Fantastic. And he was writing and teaching and doing things up until practically the moment he took off into the cosmos. He was gardening at like 100 years old. I think he made it to 100 or 101. Fantastic. Yeah, lovely. Stanley Kunitz, I'll come back to that another time, and to him. So as spring emerges, let us also come forth with greater awakenedness, aliveness in body and spirit. And here's David White's poem for us, Easter Morning in Wales. A garden inside me, unknown, secret, neglected for years, the layers of its soil deep and thick, trees in the corners with branching arms and the tangled briars like broken nets. Sunrise through the misted orchard, morning sun turns silver on the pointed twig. I have woken from the sleep of ages And I am not sure if I am really seeing or dreaming or simply astonished, walking towards sunrise, to have stumbled into the garden where the stone was rolled from the tomb of longing. Here's one of mine on that wavelength, the sense and spirit of rebirth and regenesis, which led me back to this poem. Your phoenix is rising, yours and mine. Add your telling to Ovid's, Dante's, and Pliny the Elders, but of your own sure rising, rebirthing, regenerating from the ashes and embers of your last life chapters. Their great combustions sparked reformations. Rising now with a nimbus of rays sunning forth jewel-bright eyes, as Lactantius described, and a crest of wild feathers, into a liberating life as a being of light, solarity, possibility, longevity, as a spirit of authentic mythic proportion, freeing your wings, taking flight into a newly boundless future. And next to last, as we come to a close, next to last of our sharings and sparkings, I hope, sparkings, Wendell Berry once more, the peace of wild things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night, at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and am free. Thank you, Wendell Berry. So maybe we can take this new season around us as a good opportunity within. And I give you this invocation to round out our time. Together it's called Arise. Awake. Come to light. Come to self. Stir. Spring. Flower into a greater life, a freer life now, into all your wholeness, fullness, all your glorious fruitfulness. Thank you again for listening in, floating and feeling in, whether sitting, walking, driving, or lying down, supinely attuned. All thanks to those who gladly contribute to help support these programs and my poetic arts, devoted as they are to nourishing spirits, uplifting hearts, and sparking greater awareness and aliveness. If you find this or other programs in this purpose of value, you can donate any amount by PayPal or Venmo, or directly through my site, or by regular mail to me at my P.O. Box 1032 Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. I also invite patrons to bring me their way this year for a month or longer as a private poet in residence on their property, to create new flights of work to share with and dedicate to them, to you if you choose to be one of them. As always, send along your comments, questions, suggestions. They're always welcome. Email Colin at thepoetorialist.com. Replays, as you may know, are online for you to revisit or share. You can also subscribe with ease to these broadcasts. Meanwhile, I hope you'll lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to sensing and savoring the nature and wonder of spring, and any and all ways you're springing forth naturally and wonderfully in your life, in your world, or surely can find and feel ways to. And as always, good spirits.